So you'll open Egypt labor market panel survey panel data models. You managed to open it, all of you. Then we'll open the do file called ERF Micro Training August 2019. Okay? So now you have the do file. You'll not write any code because I know it's the last session after 2 intense days, so you will not write the codes. But what we'll do now, I will go with you through the do file to explain different things. We're going to run them and see the output. We analyze it. And then you will be able to apply this on your own data set later. So in general, as Rasha said yesterday, we must declare the location of our data set and our do file, and this changes from a user to the other. Then we create the log file where we're going to have all the results and all the commands, okay? And sometimes it's useful, especially if I'm working with a co-author. So I can send him the log file so he can check what I did in the empirical research, okay? Before starting, let's open again the data set itself before looking at the do file. So as you can see here, I'll try to make it. Okay. So you have the list of variables. And the first variable that you have in the data set is, what is the first data set, the first variable that you have in the data set? Round. So the first thing that we'll do, we will run tab. So in the command part, we will run tab round. So tab stands for tabulation, and round is the years that we have in the data set. So if we run this, we're going to see that we have 4 rounds, 1988, 1999, 2006, and 2012. And we have the number of observations per round. Okay? Does this mean that we have all of these individuals belong to the panel? Definitely no, because if they belong to, all of them belong to the panel, the least thing is that we have identical number of observation across different rounds, which is not the case. I mean, but in other cases, we can have the same number of observation per round, but they are not the same individuals, right? So here, this means that until now, the data set is a pooled data set. So I gathered different years in the same data set. So we have the individual ID after the round, the household ID, the code, the unique identifier. The important variable that we have here is the variable called attr 1998 06 12. So we're going to tabulate this variable ATTR 98 06 and 12. So as you can see here, we have a different structure or a different distribution of the observations. We have some observations that are available in 3 rounds, 1998, 2006, and 2012. Then some variables included only in 98 and 2006, 2012, others in 1998, others in 2006 and 2012, others in 2006, and others in 2012. Why we don't have 1988, despite the fact that in the first command, we had 1988, right? Because in 1988, the data set itself was completely different. So this is why we didn't follow any individual between 1998 and 1998. So this is why when we look at the individuals who are present in the 3 rounds or in 2 rounds or in 1 round for this variable, they are only concerned with 1998 to 2012 only. Okay? And soon we're going to have 2018 that will be published soon. So we can follow the same individuals over 20 years between 1998 and 2018. So this is an important variable because if I'm interested in the panel dimension of the data set in order to run any kind of panel data estimation, I will have to rely on the same individuals that are present in more than a round. Whether I will focus on the individuals who are present in the 3 rounds or just 2 rounds, but they must be the same individuals over time. Okay? If we open the data set, we will see that this data set is just a second. Let's sort it. You know the command sort? So in STATA there is a command called sort. Sort, I ask STATA to rank the data based on a certain criteria, or to sort it based on a certain criteria. So I will tell STATA to sort the data by the individual ID and the round. Okay? So int ID and round. If I do this and I open the data set, we will see that we have different individuals. But until now, as you can see here, we have, why do we have different IDs and different household IDs? Why do we have different individual IDs and why do we have different household IDs? If you open the data set itself, you will see that there are several IDs.
You have many people in the household. Many individuals in the household.
No, not this. Sorry? I mean, in general, I can have different individuals in the same household, but that's not the point. Why I have different IDs per year. So I have an ID underscore 98, underscore ID underscore 06, ID under... Sorry?
They were surveyed 2 times?
Yes, so because every time we do the survey, we give the individuals a certain ID. In order to construct the panel, we must declare to STATA that we have the same ID for the individuals that we follow across time. And this is why, as you can see, we have here, for instance, individual ID underscore 12 and individual ID underscore 06, right? You will see that the ID is identical. In general, it should be identical if it's the same individual, with the only difference what we have in the beginning, whether it's 12 or 06, okay? Because that will be, for individual ID, that was the ID that was assigned to the individual in the round of 2006. In the ID underscore 12, it was the ID assigned to the individual in 2012. So in order to ask STATA that you want to run the panel, we must be sure that the ID itself will be the same, and the only difference is the suffix of the year, with the command that Rasha presented this morning when we reshape from wide to long or from long to wide. Okay? So here we have it long or wide. If you look at the data, is it long or wide?
Long.
Long, because we have the years for different individuals, as you can see here. Okay, so given the fact that one of the most important variables that we have in labor force surveys is wages, so we're going to see how wages change based on different socioeconomic characteristics. So we're going to see this by level of education, by the level of, by type of work, and so on. So we load the data, ELMPS panel data models, and then the command D, if we run it here, if I just run D, it will give me the description of the whole data set. And in general, when I start working for the first time with a data set, that's the most important command I have to run. Why? Because this command will tell me two things. First, what's the list of variables I have? That one. Two, what's the meaning of each variable? What I have here in the variable label. And whether this variable is a number or a string, so a text. Because real wages will be a continuous variable. But for instance, the education level will be a categorical variable. So I cannot identify this unless I run the D command in order to have an overview of the whole data set. Okay, so we have here all the variables that we describe. And then, as Rasha also presented this morning, the code book itself. What does code book mean? Do you remember? Sorry? The details of the variable. Exactly. So if I run code book, we're going to have all the details of this variable. So here it's called the unique individual identifier. When it was first observed, it's a string variable with 11. The unique value, how many missings do we have, and some examples. Okay? So that's the code book. And then sometimes, especially in panel, it's important because you will see later, especially when you work with surveys, that when you declare a data set that it's a panel, if I will give you an example. Let's say that instead of having Rami 98, I have here Rami 98 as well. STATA will be able to work?
No.
No. Why? Because here I have duplication. I have the same individual and the same year with two different values. If it's the same value, so it's easier because in this case it will be a duplication and STATA will drop the duplication. So there is no risk. But if they are different, it will be a problem because this means that this variable was measured with error. So I have to check which one is more accurate to include and drop the other. Because as long as I have the two observations, I will not be able to declare the panel itself. Okay? So I ask STATA to report all the duplications that I have in the data set, just to double check that I don't have any duplication. And do we have any duplication in this data set? What do you think? No, there is no duplication. Why there is no duplication? Because each observation has just one copy, right? And there is no surplus. So there is no duplication. But in general, when you will see later that when we declare a data set that it's a panel, we write xt set, for instance, individual, ID, and year, or round. Okay? If I have any repetition in the individual ID for the same year, STATA will not be able to implement this command. And therefore, I will have to drop the duplicates. If the problem still persists, I have to check where do I have any repetition of the same individual for the same years. Okay? Because that's important because unless I have this, I'll not be able to work through the panel dimension. Okay? Okay. So after this, let's look at the variable itself, which is the real hourly wage for all jobs in real Egyptian pound. And that's a very important point because whenever you work with different surveys in different points of time, you must double check that all your variables are real variables. So if you have wages, you have to deflate them by the consumer price index, for instance, or the GDP deflator. If you're working with, for instance, I was working with the World Bank Enterprise Survey, and I have firms from Tunisia, from Lebanon, from Palestine, from Egypt, from Yemen, Djibouti, and Israel. And the sales of each firm was reported in local currency. So if they are reported in local currency in different years, this means that I have to convert all the sales first in dollar, just to have the same currency for all countries, and then deflate this with the CPI of the United States, given that it's dollar. Okay? Sorry? PPP, purchasing power parity. Yeah, it's one of the things, but I mean it's in constant US dollar anyway. Okay?
But should it be constant US dollar, like you deflate it with the US, or you deflate it with the countries of sale?
It depends, because if you, in general, to be more accurate, what we do is that we first deflate it with the inflation rate of domestically to obtain real figures in local currency, and then you convert the real local currency into dollars. That's the more, accurate way to convert nominal figures into real figures. Okay? So here we have real wages. This means that for the 3 rounds that we have, or the 4 rounds that we have, we divided the nominal wages by CPI in order to obtain real figures. Then, if we run the summarize of real wages, so we have here the number of observation, the mean, standard deviation, and so on. So nothing new. What I want to do now is to look at the mean and the median of wage. What's the difference between mean and median? Which one is more robust? Why? So the mean is more robust. Why? It represents the average. What else?
The median is more robust because the mean will be affected by the values itself.
By outliers, exactly.
It is outliers.
So if we assume that we have, let's take again this example, that Rami's wage is 80 and Marie's wage is 1,000. So this means that the average wage in this economy will be, and let's add a third one, which is 500, for instance. So if I take the average of all this, it will be, or let's make it even lower, 200. So the average of all this will be divided by 3, which will be around 428, for instance, around this. Okay? So this means that my mean takes this value. But if I take the median, what will be the value? What will be the median here? 200. So as you can see, the median is significantly different from the mean, because the mean is sensitive always to outliers. So if I remove this and I calculate the mean, I will have a completely different mean, which is 140, right? So the mean is very sensitive. So this is why when we want a measure of central tendency, we rely more on the median rather than the mean, okay? Because the mean is sensitive. So what I want to do here is to tabulate, to create a table for individuals between 15 and 64, which is the age of working. They are currently employed, and here I have the weight. In general, it's very important to introduce the weight whenever I work with descriptive statistics, because each observation has a different weight compared to the others. So I can never run descriptive statistics without weights. And then tell STATA to put the mean of the real hourly wage and the median of the real hourly wage. So any questions on this command? Yes?
What is the difference between BW and AW in the previous section?
Where?
Used to identify the weight. BW equal to, yes?
That's, I mean, that's...
Sometimes we use AW in the last session, Dr. Rasha used AW.
It depends. I think it depends on the comments because for the E-weight, in general, it's used in the regressions, but we can double check. But in general, for all descriptive work, in general, we use the P. So if we run this, so as you can see here, we will have both the median and the mean for different rounds for the real hourly wage. So what can you see how the wage for both its mean and its median evolved over time? Did it increase, decrease? And here I'm talking about real wages, so there is no effect of inflation. So did wage increase, decrease over time? I mean, it's didn't change significantly, especially for the mean. And for the median, it declined between 1988 and 1998 from 4.8 to 3.4. And then it increased slightly, but in general, the tendency of both the mean and the median is almost the same, but the values are different. Okay? Then, as I mentioned, in general, the mean wage is higher. Why? Because we have, they are sensitive to outliers, which is not the case in median. Let's do the same thing. So, by for the command by sort, it's a command in general that we add in order to have some descriptive statistics for certain categories. So here I want to by sort by round, okay? And see for the individuals between 15 and 64, and again here we're using A. Who asked this question? The A, yes. If the current employment is 1, and we want to tabulate this with education. So have a table for each round by education and employment status. So if we run this, what we'll have in the table, we'll have different levels of education and then different employment status. So different levels of education going from illiterate, elementary school, middle, general, vocational, post-secondary, university, and different employment status, whether the individual is wage worker, employer, self-employed, or unpaid family worker. Okay? And in general, the sum here is over the row or the column.
100%.
The sum of different shares is over the row or over the column. The row. Why? Because here in the command, we mentioned that we want row, so the sum will be by row, and no frequency. No frequency, that we don't want the numbers themselves, but we just want the shares. Okay? So if, economically speaking, if we look at this, we will see that the higher the level of education, especially for wage workers, the higher the value of wage. And here I'm talking about real value for the 3 rounds, because in the beginning I told him to do this analysis for the 4 rounds I have, or for the 3 rounds I have. Okay? If we look at how wage change over time by education, so what we do in this command is that we're going to have a table of education 2 and round, okay? If the individual is working, and again, given the fact that we're using descriptive statistics, so we have always to introduce the expansion, which is expand, and this for the real wage for both the mean and the median. Okay? Format percentage 9.3G, I detailed this later. Oh yes. In general, most of the numbers, this is the default format is percentage 9.3G, because it tells theta it's a format. Percentage tells the theta that's the format that I want to have. 9 is the total output width, and 3 is the number of digits to appear in the right of the decimal. So this is why, in general, I mean that's the default, but just for your knowledge to know how we can read it. So if we run this, we'll have the 3 rounds, and here we have the educational attainment by round. So the education attainment by round, and here I'm talking about which variable? What I'm observing is in this table?
Education.
Yes, but which variable? Those numbers, what they represent? Sorry? Of the wage, exactly. So here I'm comparing how the wage of each level of education evolved over time. Okay? So we have the 3 rounds, and we have here we have only the median in this table. So here I have median wages for different level of educations and over time. So as you can see here, what we're generally trying to do is to have some descriptive statistics before we implement the empirical work, how everything evolved over time, just to understand the dynamics behind. Okay? So here we have the median wage over time by level of education. We can also have another type of command, which is tabstat. And tabstat in general is very useful because with this command we can export tables into Excel or and insert directly them into the paper, for instance. So tabstat here, I will ask STATA to do a new table with this variable for those who are working, and the round is 1998 with the expansion weight. And in general, if I want to write a command over 2 lines in STATA, I will add those 3 dashes, okay, slashes, sorry. And then what kind of statistics I want to have in the table? I want the median. Here I can write any type of economic aggregate. So statistical aggregate, sorry, mean, median, sum, any type of statistics. Then the format, we already talked about it, by education, and I want him to save this. Why I want him to save this? Because I want to later extract these results into an Excel table. Okay? So if I run this, so this means that until now, we've seen 2 types of commands. The table, okay, and the tabstat, where I identified this one is much better because I can directly extract the results later. So if I do this, we have here the median, as we said, for different levels of education. And why is it called P50? What does P50 represent? The 15th percentile, which is the median, exactly. And we have, again, different levels of wages. So again, I can run this for any kind of variable. So you have more details here. Then, after I did this, what I want is that to ask STATA, okay, to do the same thing for all the rounds. Okay, because until now I did it only for the first round. But I want to do a similar table for all the rounds. So what I will ask STATA to do is to save the results as matrices. And this is a bit tedious, but we're going to see what STATA does, because we're going to have a matrix for each value as a separate matrix. And then I will ask STATA to combine all of them in one table. And that's what you have here in the do file. So we ask him to list, this command matrix list where we're going to have the 1998 median wage that we have just computed, okay? And then we do the same for all the levels, okay? So if we do this, you can just run this part, and as you can see here, the matrices that we have are matrices 1 by 1. What does a matrix 1 by 1 mean? It's just one cell, which makes sense because I'm observing only one value, which is the median wage. So why do we do this? Because I want to repeat the same exercise for different rounds and then combine all this in the same table. Okay? So we're going to repeat this for 2006 with the matrix. Then do the same thing for 2012, exactly the same thing. The only thing that I'm changing here is the number of the round. Okay? And then I will ask him to combine all these together. So in this last command where I have matrix, define the median wage that relies on the 3 median wage that I constructed. Okay? And if I run this, the final outcome that we get is to run these last 2 commands where we're going to have the real, after STATA, run a matrix for each value of each median wage for each round. What he will do now, he will gather all these values in the same table for different rounds and different levels of education. And that's what we have here in the last command. So as you can see here, we have the median wage, which is P50, okay, for different levels of educations. That's what we have in each row. And then for each column, we have different what? Years or rounds, exactly. Okay? So all this, I didn't do anything related to the panel estimation. I'm just doing some of the commands with descriptive statistics. Then finally, I can ask STATA with a command called estout. Estout is a command that helped me extract the results, like the command outrec2 that I was talking about yesterday. So both of the 2 commands, they help me extract the results into Excel in order to work with them, and insert them in a Word document later on a LaTeX. It depends on what I'm working on. So if we run this, we're going to have a blue part here that appears, and if I click on it, I will have the table very clean with all the years and the education levels. And then I can use directly this table and insert it in the paper. Okay? So why I'm doing this? Because afterwards, whenever I will change the variable, it will be much easier instead of repeating the whole procedure. And every time I extract the table and rewrite the labels, add the years. So this is why sometimes this commands, is much less time consuming than doing everything manually. Okay? And that's and as you can see here, I'm just mentioning that. Yes.
In papers, we found that they put means in between brackets standard deviation. So we do that like that.
It depends, but it depends on the type of statistic that I want STATA to extract.
Mean and standard deviation.
So
Or median standard deviation.
in this case, I will have to do this in the beginning, in tab stat. For stats, I will have to add. Okay. Well, later on, we have a graphing tool, but I will not do this because I think I mean it can be easily done. Again, I will determine which statistic for which variable, for which categories, and we can get the graph. So I can even specify the color of the graph. For instance, here it's green, but I will let you do this because it's not really interesting. What's important now is to look at the panel. So yes, so we can start from this part here, panel data. As I said, the first important command that we have to see is the attrition variable, which is 980612, because this variable tells me which observations are followed over time. And for these individuals, I'll be able to run, for the individuals that are present either in 2 or at least 2 or maximum 3 rounds, I will be able to run a panel estimation. So what I will ask STATA here is to keep the individuals of category 1 and 4. Who are the individuals categories 1 and 4? How can I mean, from this table, understand which category is 1 and which category is 4? What do you think? Because what STATA gives me here is the label itself, meaning that 39,000 individuals are present in the 3 rounds, 8,000 are present in 2 rounds, 6,000 are present in 1 round, and so on and so forth. So how can I determine which category of these 1 and which is 2 and which is 4? Because that we have in the command. Not necessarily by time. So in general what we do is I can run the same command, but I will add the option no label. If I run no label, in this case, I will have exactly the same categories, but instead of having the label, I have the number of the label. Because practically speaking, if I want to run a command for a specific category of these categories, it will be very difficult to write the whole thing in 1888 and 2006 and so on. And sometimes if you have spaces, it can be a source of error. Sometimes if you have capital and we have small letters, again, it can block the code. So the easiest thing is to work just with without the labels. So if I run the same command without labels, it's clear that category 1, what does it include? So category 1, what does it include?
So all 3, the ones that are followed
All
in
the
the
3 rounds, and category 4?
The only 2 rounds, not 1999.
Exactly. So I will just focus on category 1 and 4 and drop the others. Important thing, never save a data over the original data. Because if you do any error, you will lose all what you did. So whenever you do any substantial change in the data set, you have to save it with a new name. So you have to save as a new name for the data set in order to avoid overwriting on the initial one. So if we keep this, okay, so we have 67,000 observations that are deleted. Is this clear? So what has been deleted? What has been deleted here?
All the ones.
Sorry?
Only the one that appears in one year only.
All the individuals that were here, that were interviewed, only 1 year. But this means that how many rounds do I have here? 3 or 2?
3.
1 includes 1988, 2006, and 2012. And 4 includes 6 and 12. So this means that by the end of the day, I have 3 rounds. But the problem is that I have individuals The first category includes all the individuals that I followed over the 3 years, but the second group includes only the individuals that I followed only in 2 years, which are 2006 and 2012. So what I want to do is to have a balanced panel, because why shall I have for some individuals 3 rounds and for the others I just have 2 rounds? So the next command that I will run is that I will ask STATA to keep if round is equal to 2006 and 2012. And this means that I will have all the observations of 1998 that will be dropped. So now I have a panel with just 2 rounds, but for all individuals.
Why we didn't choose from the beginning 4?
Because there are some, the first category includes the individuals that are followed over the 3 years. So if I drop them, this means that I will drop some individuals that are followed over the 2 years. Okay? That's a very good question. Why didn't we keep from the beginning only 2004? Sorry, the 4th category. Because in the first category, I have some individuals that are followed over 1998 and 2006, right? And 1988. But what I want from this category, only the 2 values of 2006 and 2012. So this is why I first kept 1 and 4, but then I dropped 1998 for the first category. So this means that all the individuals that I have now are surveyed, are the same individuals that are surveyed over only 2 years, but for all the data sets. Okay? Next step, we'll just keep the variables that we need for the sake of simplicity. So we keep the identification, the identifier, real wage, current employment, education, wealth, round, the panel that was there, and the year the individual got the job. Okay? So, as you can see here, if you open STATA itself, now we have a much lower number of observations. A much lower number of variables, right? Just to double check, I will write tab round, and here how many rounds do I have? Only 2 rounds. If I run a simple summarize, I will get the summary details of all the variables. So as you can see here, fin ID has 0 observation. Why? Because it's a string variable. Exactly. And if it's a string variable, it will not be read as a continuous variable on which we can run the command sum. Okay? Then we have the index of wealth, education. It's a categorical variable taking the value from 1 to 8. Years of getting the first job going from 1918 until 2012. Current employment, whether the individual is currently employed or not. The type of employment from 1 to 4 because it's a categorical variable as well. Wage worker, family unpaid worker, and so on. The real wage and the panel. The panel weight, I mean. So those are the variables that we need. I will skip the part of reshape because we don't need it now. I just want to go directly to the panel, to the panel data models because that's what's interesting. So here, just for your knowledge, what we have here is that we try to construct, we reshape the data from long to wide in order to construct some graphs that describes the evolution of wages over time for the same individuals, right? Because now my data set includes only individuals who are interviewed in the 2 rounds. So I want to observe for Rami his wage over the 2 years. I want to observe for Muhammad his wage over the 2 years. So to do this, I had to reshape the data set from long to wide to have the 2 values beside each other, okay? And then I construct a graph for those who have, for instance, those who are working as wage worker and how their wage evolved over time. Okay? Is this clear? Any question on this? So that we basically what we do in this part. Okay? Now I will move to the panel models because that's the most important thing. So why I did all this, despite the fact that we're not really covering the panel thing, which is the topic of this session, because an important thing before doing the empirical work is to see how the evolution of the variables of interest took place. I mean, did really wage increase over time? How many observations are here for the same individuals in different rounds? What's the number of individuals that are included in their 3 rounds? What's the difference between the 3 rounds and the 2 rounds? All this is very useful before doing the empirical analysis itself. Okay? So in the next 30 to 40 minutes, what we want to do is to run a panel model. But in order to run the panel model, we have to recall now the data set, because remember we dropped some variables, we dropped some observations and all this. So now we have to use the initial data set. So how to do this? We'll get back here in STATA. Okay, we will write clear. If we write clear, all the data set will be cleared, and then I can reopen the initial data set. So this is why never to overwrite on the same data set. Okay? So the first thing that we're going to do, after we recall the data, we will gen the log of, in general, what we're going to estimate, we estimate what we call a Syrian equation model. So the Syrian equation model is what we call the human capital model, where we examine the return on education. So our dependent variable will be the log hourly wage, and our independent variable, most important independent variable, is education. And this is why we call it the human capital model, or the Syrian equation, thanks to Mincer in his work that was done in the 70s. So we generate the log of hourly wage. That's the first thing, because that will be our dependent variable. And here we can use log or len, doesn't change anything. And then we want to keep, so we want to keep the 2 rounds, 2006 and 2012 only. So almost half of the data set was dropped. Okay? Because again, I want just to focus on the 2 rounds that have the highest level of panel or individuals that are interviewed over time. Okay? Here you have some explanation that you can read later. Well, now I'll be starting to look at some variables. So one of the variables is the work conditions. And this variable, as you can see here, the variable called car stable P, okay, which is the stability of work. So if we run this, we will see how the job is stable or not. So whether we have a permanent contract, a temporary contract, seasonal one, or intermittent work. So as you can see here, over the 30,000 observation, almost 80% of the observations have a permanent job, and 20% either intermittent, seasonal, or temporary. Okay? But here I'm not looking, at the same individuals until now. I'm just pulling all the data together because I didn't declare the data as panel. Okay? So this can be one of the covariate. Later, there are some other commands that you can use in order to label the variables. What do I mean by labels? It means to add a label that clarifies the meaning of the variable, because car stable P is meaningless. So sometimes I want to add another label. And this labeling utility, which is labutil that has several subcommands can be used in order to add labels to the variables. Probably it will not be available on your laptops, neither on my laptop, I mean this laptop, so we'll not run it, but just you can run it later and you will see how it can be used in order to label different variables. Okay? What I want to do now is, one of the, if we look at the survey itself, we will see, for instance, that I will ask, what's your name? Sumaya. I will ask Sumaya, where do you work? And she tells me that I'm working in the private sector or in the public sector. So in the code of the data set itself, 1 is for public and 2 is for private. But if I use 1 and 2, it can be misleading. Why it can be misleading? Because it can, in this case, if I introduce them in this way in the regression, this shows that I will not be able to interpret them as dummy variables, right? So this is why sometimes I want to change the initial coding with a new coding. For instance, if gender is, I have a gender variable that takes the value of 1 if he is a male and 2 if she's a female. But I want to make it a dummy variable that takes the value of 1 if she's a woman and 0 otherwise. So this is why what we're going to do now is to prepare the variables that we're going to use in our panel estimation in order to run the panel regression. So the first one is to create the 2 sectors, public and private, which is generate, so I will generate a new variable which is called public that takes the value of 0 and replace public equal 1 if the current sector where the individual is working is equal 1 or 2. So what's this variable first, just to know what does it include? So tab. So as you can see here, we have government, public enterprise, private, joint venture, foreign, and other. So what I will ask STATA is to create a new variable called public that takes the value of 1 for those who are working in either government or in public enterprise. And then because in Egypt there is a difference between both, public enterprise are profit-seeking enterprises, but the government is just the government. I mean, if you work in the administration itself. Okay? You know what we call in Arabic شركات قطاع الأعمال العام والحكومة. So that's the difference. But what I want to do now is to combine both being the public sector and all the other will be otherwise, because it includes private, joint venture, foreign, or any other type of economic sector. Okay? So I will generate the and how I identified 1 and 2 here. So again, I can identify this if I check without the labels. So I will see that without the labels, the first 2 categories are 1 and 2. Okay? So I can run this. So I will have a new variable called public. So I can tabulate public, and I will have around 75% of my data set working in the private sector and 25% working in the public sector. Okay? Then for here we just checked the sector where the individual works, but we want to see also the economic activity where he's working. And here we have different sectors where individuals are working, whether it's agriculture, mining, manufacturing, services, and so on. And that's the difference between the economic sector and the economic activity. So economic sector is public-private, but economic activity is the activity of production itself. Sorry? Agriculture, industry, or services. Okay? Because, I mean, why we're looking at all these variables? Because all these variables will be useful when we start doing the empirical work. Okay? Any question? Anything that's not clear in the do file? Well, then we can, this code is important because sometimes I have more details than I need. Meaning that, for instance, if in the current economic activity variable, I have 13 economic activities. But for me, it will be enough to have one sector for agriculture, one sector for industry, and one sector for services, and that's it. So I can do a recode by asking STATA to recode the initial variable that I have with a new code. So if I have, for instance, two agricultural sectors, I will ask STATA to create a new code for them, which is 1. If I have one sector of manufacturing, it will be as it is, 2, or its new code will be 2. And if I have 10 sectors of services, all of them will have, for instance, 3, and so on. Okay? So that's the idea of recoding. So that's what we do here. We recode the economic activities. So 1 will be 2, 3 and 4 will be 2, 9 to 13 will be 18, 17 will be 18, and I will gen a new 1. So just to double check what I did. So I must have, what does this table mean? It shows me the link between the initial code and the new code. And this is why we have non-zero values where the changes took place. But for other sectors that didn't have a recode, we have 0 changes, right? So that's what we have here. So after doing the recoding, we'll also generate a new variable of gender. So this command is very practical because I can generate a new variable which is female based on the variable that is already included in the survey, which is sex. So what I tell STATA here is to generate a dummy variable that takes the value of 1 if the initial variable sex has a value of 2. And by default, it will create, for the other observations, 0. So here, this means that for this variable, we're going to have 1 for males, 1 for females, and 0 for males. Okay? So we can run this. Then for years of schooling, we didn't change anything. Then we can start the empirical work. If I run a simple OLS, what will be the problem?
Efficiency, heteroscedasticity.
Sorry?
Indigeneity.
Yes, because I'm not controlling for the unobserved heterogeneity. So if I will start with a simple regression where I will run the effect of years of schooling on wages, I will have something that is very positive and significant, but in reality, it might be biased. Why it might be biased? Because I'm pulling all the data together for 2006 and 2012, and the condition of strict exogeneity is not, or exogeneity in general is not satisfied. So this means that here, if I say that years of schooling increases log hourly wages, it's misleading because this result is not really robust. Why? Because until now, I'm pulling all the data of 2006 and 2012 together without controlling the unobserved heterogeneity. So there is an endogeneity between these two variables. Okay? But at least, before we continue, as you can see here, we have the expected positive coefficient. So the higher the level of schooling, the higher the level of wage. Okay? We can add other controls, like for instance, gender, work stability, whether the individual is working in the public sector, some sector dummies, and so on. And again, just an important point that here I'm running the regression only for those who are working, for wage workers, which makes sense. Why? Because I cannot observe a wage for a non-wage worker, right? If I have a subsistence work or I have an unpaid family work, I have no observed wage. In some cases, we can impute the value of wage for these individuals, but for the time being, we're just running the regression for those who are working. And this is why this regression can suffer from a selection bias. Why it can suffer from a selection bias? Because I observe the wage only for those who are working. But perhaps those who are working, in general, they have a higher level of education. So actually, the higher level of education explains the probability of working or not. It does not explain the level of wage. This is why we have to resolve the problem of selection bias. One of the variables in the literature that is used in order to control for the selection bias is the education of the parents. Because again, the 2SLS is more or less the same mechanism as the IV. So I have to search for a variable that satisfies what we call the exclusion criteria, that explains the first step only of belonging to the labor market or working, okay, and does not explain the level of wage. So perhaps if the education of my parents is high, this will help me have a high level of education and then I will be able to work, but the level of education of my parents does not affect my wages. So this is why this variable can sometimes be used in this regard, okay? So we will run this simple regression, not simple, this multiple regression, but I mean with more covariates. There is a variable that I didn't generate. Oh, yes. So that's the stability of work. I think it should. What's still missing? Yes, those were the commands I just explained without running. Yes. So now we have we now have the regression, but until now it's an OLS, it's not a panel. So we have our dependent variable real wage, years of schooling is positive and significant, females negative and significant, stability of work when the work is irregular, it's negative and significant, which is expected. Public, it's positive and significant, so those who are working in the public sector, they earn more than those who are working in the private sector. But all these coefficients are reliable?
No.
Until now, no, because I didn't control for the unobserved heterogeneity. So I cannot really rely on them in order to say that there is a wage discrimination or that the public sector gives more wages than, it might be the case later, but once I control for the unobserved heterogeneity. Okay? So I will generate one of the things, remember, for the pooled OLS, we said that what I can do in the beginning is to introduce a year dummy to control for the unobservables at the year level. So I will create a new dummy variable that takes the value of 1 if we have 2012 and 0 otherwise. And that's what we have here. And then we can run the same regression with the 2012 dummy. It's slightly better than the initial one because as you can see here, the dummy variable of 2012 is statistically significant, which means that the fact that we have two different years, I mean one of the 2 years matters compared to the other. Okay? The last two commands. So after doing all this, again, until now did I run the panel estimation? Is this a panel estimation?
No.
Why?
We need to set up the time.
Exactly. So I have to declare that it is a panel. But until now, it's just a simple OLS. So what I have to do now is to first, given the fact that the coefficient of 2012 is positive and significant, so this means that in general, wages increased between 2006 and 2012 because 2012 has a positive effect with respect to 2006. So we can also introduce some interactions. You know the concept of interactions, meaning that I interact two variables in order to see whether there is an additional effect through a certain variable or not. Okay, and that's what we do here. But again, until now, all these variables are, all these regressions are OLS, and they do not control for the unobserved heterogeneity. So what I will do, I will just run some regressions with the panel dimension of the data set. So in order to do so, I have to drop all the individuals that do not belong to the panel. So this means that I will keep only the individuals that are surveyed in both 2006 and 2006 and 2012. Okay? It's the last 20 minutes, but please wake up. So I will keep if panel is not missing. I can re-estimate this using OLS, because remember, in the first estimation, before dropping the individuals who do not belong to the panel, I was running an OLS estimation for which individuals? For those who are included in 2006, 2012, those who are included in 2006 only, and those who are included in 2012 only. That's the first regression I was just running, because I had all the individuals included in the two rounds, 2006 and 2012. Now what I want to do is to keep only those who belong to the panel. But this means that I will have only the individuals that are present in the two surveys, and I will first run an OLS on, exactly. So I will first run a pooled OLS for these individuals that are present in the two surveys, and then I will run a panel. Okay? So if I run a simple OLS for these individuals only, again, the coefficient of year is still positive and significant. Years of schooling is positive and significant. Female negative and significant. Stability negative and significant. Public positive and significant. Here we have different economic activities and the constant. Okay? So I just want to compare the number of observations that we have here compared to what we had before. So here we have 12,611 observation, right? And before we had, before we dropped all this, 17,600 observations. So this means that around 5,000 observations were present in one round only. And that's what we dropped in the second estimation. Okay? Well, I will skip this because I just want to focus on the estimation of the model itself. So I can run here xt set individual ID and round. And what I get here, that it's a string variable. So STATA cannot run such a command with text. So I have to encode it. And that's what we had in this command, which is the fin ID. So here, this variable, we have two options. Either to run what we have here in the do file, or the alternative would be to encode end ID, so generate a code based on the individual ID, which will be equal to gen, for instance, ID2. Sorry. It's without equal, comma. So now I have a new ID, which is, so what I did, encode individual ID, which is a text, and I convert it into a code. Then I will use the same command, which is xtset, but instead of int ID, I will use ID2. So as you can see here, we have panel variable ID2, weakly balanced, meaning that we have, for some individuals, missings that are, some individuals that are still not present in the two surveys. And we have the time variable 2006 and 2012. Okay? So it's balanced, but here weakly, because when we have all the observations for both years and all the individuals, we call it strongly balanced. Okay? But we can run later the xtreg command. So in general, as a rule in STATA, whenever I run a panel estimation, any command in panel, I have to add xt first. Okay? So in time series, we do ts set to declare that a data set is a time series. Here, in order to declare that it's a panel, we declared it with xt. So what I did, because in general we face this problem a lot, especially when we work with data from the Word Development Indicators. When you download data from the Word Development Indicators website, all the country codes are text. So if you try to declare these data sets as a panel, STATA will refuse. Why it will refuse? Because we cannot declare string variables. So you have to encode them by converting them from string to code, and then declare the data set as a panel. Okay? So the two dimensions that we have here are time dimension and individual dimension. Then for the command itself is very simple. Instead of reg, it's xtreg. Then we have the classical way where we have the dependent and followed by all the independent variables, comma, and then we choose whether it's fixed effect or random effect. By default, if we do not specify in STATA, it runs a random effect estimation. So if I run just an xtreg without specifying that it's a fixed effect, it will run a random effect. So this is why if I want to run a fixed effect, I have to explicitly add the option. If I don't add it, by default it will be a random effect. So if I run this random effect estimation, whether I add the RE or not, I have insufficient observations. Why is that? Oh, I know. Okay. No, it's not that, but because in the original data, they had some manipulations in the middle where we generated the first difference, and this changed the ID itself. So I just want to run these variables. And that's the advantage of having everything in the do file. Because in this case, I discovered an error. I will not have to read write all the comments. So I'm just running everything now. Okay. Then the gender variable, as I said. The years of schooling doesn't change. Then we had the simple regressions in the beginning. Then we created the dummy variable for 2012. And then we keep only the panel. I mean, a minor point here, in general, also to extract the results of regression, we can run this command, which is ststore. And this command helps us extract the results. Okay? What do we have here? I mean, we don't have time to this, but in general, you know, we can define the fixed effect, or we can understand the fixed effect through a first difference estimation. Why is that? Because let's say if I have yt is equal to alpha 0 plus beta 1 xt I plus epsilon it, okay? And I have this for t minus 1. So what happens if I take the difference between these two equations? If I take the difference between both, we agree that that's the first difference, right? Yes or no? The first difference is the difference between what happens in t minus what happens in t minus 1. So if I take the difference between these two equations, it will eliminate the fixed effect. So this, if we assume that here the fixed effect is this, or even if it's an I that's changed by individual. So if I take the difference, I will have yt minus 1 I, which will be equal to alpha I minus alpha I plus beta 1 multiplied by x t I minus x t minus 1 I plus the difference in the error term as well. So it will be delta y I, which is equal to 0 plus beta 1 delta x. So that's basically as if it's a fixed effect. Why? Because all time invariant variables have been removed, right? And this is why what we do in this part of the do file is that we try to run the fixed effect estimation through a first difference approach. Okay? We're running out of time, so yes. Yeah. But I mean, it's applicable here, even if you have to. Okay? So I will run the random effect now. I think it should work. I did not create the real hourly wage. So now I can run, let's start with the fixed effect. So what happens when we run the fixed effect? So as you can see here, the output of STATA, we have the number of observations, which is classical, the number of groups. The number of groups is the number of individuals that I follow over the 2 years. Okay? Then observation per group, the minimum is 1, the maximum is 2, because for some observations for some individuals I observed them only in 1 year, and the values are missing in the second year. But the maximum, it's normal that it's 2 because I have only 2 rounds. Okay? And then we have the R square within, between, and overall. What does the R square within mean?
Within
Yes.
is specific for a particular individual over time.
Okay, and between?
Between intervals.
Between?
Time the rounds. Between rounds.
Between, here in this case, it will be between individuals, right? So the part of the variation is explained of what happens across time for the same individual, and part of the variation is explained by the fact that individuals themselves, they differ from each other. And then we have our results here. So as you can see, the correlation between ui and xb is equal to a value, which makes sense because for the fixed effect model, we assume that they can be correlated, and this will not violate my assumptions because the ui here is part of the intercept, not part of the error term, right? And as you can see here, so years of schooling are now insignificant, which means that if I just simply run a simple OLS, we will see that it's misleading because I can assume that years of schooling, they have an effect on real hourly wage, while in reality, when I take into consideration the unobserved heterogeneity, it's not the case. Let's run the random effect as well to see to what extent they differ. I just will run two commands and I'm done. So for the random effect, as you can see here, correlation ui and x is equal to 0, and between brackets it is assumed because it's an assumption of the random effect, right? And for the years of schooling, is it positive or significant or insignificant? It's significant. So in this case, we can see that there is a significant difference between the random effect and the fixed effect. And if there is a significant difference between the coefficients, which one shall we expect to use?
Fixed effect.
The fixed effect. I mean, this should be confirmed by the Hausman test, but I mean, for the time being, we can expect that a fixed effect regression will give us more consistent coefficients consistent coefficients, while the random effect will give bias 1 because there is a correlation between xi and the explanatory variables and ui. Okay? So to choose between both, we will have to, in general, what we do, after we run each regression, we have to tell STATA to store the results of the regression. And we do this by asking STATA to run this command, which is ststore. So ststore ec1. So these estimates that have just been done will have to be stored in STATA under the name of ec1. That will be, for instance, the random effect. And then I run the fixed effect, and I ask STATA ststore ec2. Okay? And then I tell STATA to run a Hausman test between ec1 and ec2. That's the idea of the estimation store command that we run after each regression. So if I run this, and actually surprisingly, and that's one of the interesting things, as you can see here, in the fixed effect regression that I have, female didn't drop. Is this normal? In the fixed effect regression,
no,
the female variable didn't drop. It was not dropped. Is this normal? It's not normal because in general, at least in Egypt, I mean, it's very difficult to change the gender. So this is why definitely it's an error of measurement. Because if we just have for one individual who has an error of measurement of his gender, it's normal that we have this. But in general, this variable, if it's measured in an accurate way, it must be dropped in the fixed effect regression. Okay? So that's a minor comment. So I will run the two commands. So random effect. I will store this. Then I will run the fixed effect. I will store this. And finally, I will ask STATA using the command of Haussmann test to compare the two estimations. And as you can see here, that's the outcome of STATA for Haussmann. So I have all the coefficients for estimation 3. Estimation 3 is which one?
Fixed.
Fixed effect. I have all the coefficients for the random effects, and I test the whether the coefficients are significantly different from each other or not. And then at the end, you will see that our coefficients are consistent under H node and HA obtained from XTreg, and beta, which are the coefficients from the random effect, are inconsistent under HA but efficient under H node. So here, the probability, the p-value here is 0.000, which means that we reject the null hypothesis, or we do not reject it. We reject it. So if we reject it, this means that we reject the hypothesis according to which the individual effects are not correlated to the explanatory variables. So in this case, they are correlated, and if they are correlated, I have to use a fixed effect regression. So whenever the statistic is significant, I have to use fixed effect. If it's insignificant, this means that the two estimations yield same coefficients, but the random effect one is no. I will not finish today before you say it's more efficient. Exactly. Okay? Any question? Yes?
Traditionally speaking, R square measures
Explanatory power.
explanatory power of our explanatory variables. Here, I observe that it is very low.
Yes.
And in the random effect model, it doesn't appear in the regression
Yes.
table when I use our correct command. How we delete R square in this case?
Just for the first question, in general, when we use micro data sets, the R squared is in general much lower than macroeconomic data sets. And this is why what really matters, first, is that the model is correctly specified. Second, that your results are not, if it's correctly specified, so you will not have biased coefficients, and that your results are in line with the economic theory or with the literature. But the value of R squared per se for for individual data sets is not really the most important thing. And even if you look at papers that are published in, American Economic Review or Econometrica, and that use firm level data or household data or labor force data, you will see that the R squared is in general much lower, has nothing to do with time series data set. That's the first question. For the second one, sometimes in the outrag it does not appear. So you will see in this do file that there are some commands. We will not be able to go through them now, but there are some commands that you specify what kind of statistics you want in the final Excel sheet. So you explicitly write, like what I did, in the beginning of the session, that I want the mean, the median for these variables. So sometimes you ask STATA to generate, again, the R squared. Okay? Yes?
Yes, in this kind of models, generally we are interested to do experiment. So, for example, today my wage is X, and I negotiate my wage for the next year, given on my wage today. caps this dynamic effect. In this case, the fixed effects still work.
I mean, they're not. You mean, so here your question is if we introduce the lagged value of wage?
Yes, T minus 1, because it's a determined variable in negotiation for the wage in the next year. So maybe it's.
I mean, personally speaking, I have never seen this in human capital models. Introducing the lagged wage in such estimations, I have never seen it.
It's classical in the choice of labor status. For example, my status.
Yes, but in this case, yeah, but I mean, in this case, your dependent variable is not wage. Yeah.
But the wage also is valuable because there we negotiate the wage for the next year depending on the wage today. So I will not accept, theoretically, I will not accept the wage lower than my wage. So the decision of the outcome of not wages is depending on the wage of today.
I'm not really sure whether it can be introduced or not, because actually I'm not examining how the wage will change with respect to my previous wage, but what I'm examining, as I mentioned, what are the return on human capital.
Yes, I'm totally.
But technically, I'm not sure whether it can be introduced or not. So I don't want to say something that I'm not sure of. But I mean, I've seen several human capital papers where my dependent variable is real hourly wage, but I have never seen the lagged wage introduced in the model. And I think another important thing is that here the time dimension is very low. So perhaps in a longer span, if you're going to run a dynamic panel, it can be justified, because the idea behind dynamic panel is that you instrument the endogenous variable with its lagged values. So that's like the Arellano bound estimation technique, for instance. But the condition here is to have definitely more than two time points, I mean.
I think it's more logical to put a wage square more than a wage.
No, here I'm not examining nonlinearities. I introduce nonlinearities for instance, for education, for age, for experience. But I personally, I've never seen in human capital models where we have wages on the right-hand side. I have never seen, whether squared or lagged, I have never seen it.
Because if wage exceed another.
Yes, but this is not, this does not affect my current wage, as if I have an identity in this case. Because I'm explaining wage by itself. It doesn't make sense. So, I mean, for lagged, it can be justified if we have a longer time span, but I will never explain the variable with itself.
Because if you have done this, you will be indigenized.
No, not indigeneity, it will be an identity. I will not estimate anything.
Even if there is no identity, it will be indigenized.
No, I mean it. It's not a simple endogeneity, because I'm as if I'm explaining what GDP is equal to C plus I plus J plus X minus M.
Matrix, like singular matrix.
So it's a complete identity, so it cannot be estimated. Any other question? So with this, we'll conclude the 2 intense days that we had. Thank you for making it to Cairo for just such a short period for the internship, for the course. I hope it was useful, and I hope you benefited at either the theoretical or the empirical level, or both. You have my email, and Ramaj shared with you all the slides, the readings, the do files, and the data sets. 3 important points. So first, what we've done in these 2 days is never sufficient to let you master these techniques. So any technical know-how is a learning by doing experience. So you have really to invest to use the do files that you have now to search for online, either on STATA forums or on STATA help, to get back to your colleagues, and but really to work on what you've learned, because any software, if you do not invest in the software itself, it will not be as rewarding as if you do it. That's one. Two, in general, probably, I mean, it's not confirmed yet, but as you've seen in the announcement, we give the opportunity for those who attended the workshop to write a paper that can be published as a working paper in the ERF working paper series. So we will follow up with this with you, I mean, regarding this point, because in general, what we did until now, we haven't received the papers, but what we did in the last training is that we asked the participants to write a proposal of 2 pages, and then if the proposal is accepted, they can proceed with the paper, and they send the paper 6 months later, and then the paper can be published as a working paper at ERF here. So we'll follow up with this with you regarding this point. Third and last point, whenever you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me. And before you leave, we just have a small celebration by giving you the certificates of participation and take photos. So that's the ceremonial part of the participant. So Ahmed Mohammed Dawood. Oh, sorry? Oh, طيب. Yes, we have to take the photos. So, and Ramaj will share with you also the photos that we had. هنا كده. طيب. So now we're going to distribute the certificates of training. Ahmed Mohammed Dawood. طب سقفوا له طيب. الزكي خير علاشة الحلو. آيات أحمد عاصي. مبروك كده. داليا حسام. مبروك. احنا ما عنديش سيريمونيه دوبل دبلومه. ايمان مؤدب. لازم. مبروك. هشام مدويني. كده. ميرسي. ميرسي. جوانا عادل. عادل صح؟ ما هو مكتوب جوانا عادل عبد الأحد. مي محمود. ممدوح عبد المولى. مروان إكيرا. مروة جابر. محمد المسيدي. عقبال الماسترز بقى. مونيا العزالي. مصطفى زيرولي. رامي عبد المعطي. سوسن موسى. سمية غرارة. And that's it. So thank you. Have a nice day in Cairo, and we'll see you soon. Let's take a collective photo.